The dining room of the crown jewel gleamed under crystal chandeliers, each facet throwing light across white tablecloths and polished silverware. Friday night in Chicago meant every table occupied, every server moving with practiced urgency through the carefully choreographed chaos of fine dining. Ellie Williams balanced 3 plates along her left arm, the weight familiar after 3 years of perfecting the angle that kept sauces level and presentations pristine. Table 12 needed their entrees, and the elderly couple had been waiting exactly 14 minutes since their appetizers cleared. Not long enough to complain, but long enough to notice. She set down the first plate with a smile that came from muscle memory rather than genuine warmth. 26 years old, and she'd perfected the art of looking grateful for a job that paid $15 an hour, plus tips that barely covered the gap between survival and drowning. The couple murmured their thanks, already reaching for forks, and Ellie pivoted toward the kitchen to check on Table 7's wine when she caught movement in the corner of her vision. Table 14. The worst seat in the restaurant, tucked into the back corner where the swinging kitchen door occasionally clipped unwary diners, and the air conditioning vent created a perpetual draft. The hostess only seated people there when every other option had been exhausted, which made the current occupant unusual. A man sat hunched over the menu, gray hair unkempt, wearing a jacket that had seen better years. The collar was frayed, the cuffs stained dark, with something that might have been grease or dirt or both. His shoes, Ellie's eyes went there automatically, the way servers learn to assess tipping potential, were old Nikes with the soles separating from the upper on the left foot. Homeless. Or close enough that the distinction didn't matter, which raised the immediate question of how he'd gotten past Amber at the host stand. The crown jewel didn't have a written policy about turning away people based on appearance, but everyone who worked there understood the unwritten rules. Appearance mattered. Perception shaped reality. A restaurant that charged $42 for a Caesar salad didn't seat people who looked like they'd spent the night on a heating grate. Ellie grabbed her order pad and headed toward Table 14, weaving between a foretop of businessmen and a couple celebrating something that involved champagne and expensive perfume. Up close, the man was older than she'd initially thought, late 50s, maybe 60, but his hands resting on the menu were clean, the nails trimmed neat despite the overall impression of neglect. Something didn't fit, though Ellie couldn't articulate exactly what triggered the instinct. "Good evening, sir. May I start you with our wine list?" He looked up, and for half a breath, Ellie felt the full weight of his attention. Not the glazed look of someone struggling with addiction or mental illness, but something sharp and assessing. Then his eyes dropped back to the menu, and the moment passed. "I'll have the 16-ounce Wagyu ribeye, medium rare, and the 2018 Opus 1. The words came out quiet but precise, no hesitation or uncertainty. Ellie's pen hovered over her pad. The Wagyu was $425. The Opus 1 ran $200 a glass. $625 for a single meal, ordered by a man whose jacket had holes in both elbows. "Excellent choice, sir. That's $425 for the steak and $200 for the wine." She said it gently, giving him a chance to reconsider, to claim he'd misread the menu, to save them both the awkwardness that was coming. Some confused tourists wandered into the Crown Jewel, thinking it was a standard steakhouse, not realizing until they saw prices that this was a different category of dining entirely. "I understand." His voice carried no embarrassment, no acknowledgement that anything unusual had just occurred. Ellie wrote down the order, her brain already racing ahead to the inevitable confrontation. Derek Patterson, the general manager, watched the dining room from his post near the bar with the territorial alertness of a predator. He would have noticed the shabby man at Table 14. He would have questions about why Ellie had taken an order instead of politely suggesting the gentleman might be more comfortable at one of the excellent casual establishments within walking distance. She input the order at the server station, each keystroke feeling like signing her own reprimand, the kitchen ticket printed with a soft mechanical whir, and Ellie was reaching for it when Derek's voice cut across the ambient noise of the dining room. "Ellie, kitchen, now!" Every head within earshot turned. The crown jewel prided itself on discretion, on creating an atmosphere where nothing ever disrupted the seamless flow of service. Derek's voice had shattered that illusion, loud enough that diners 6 tables away paused mid-conversation. Ellie felt heat crawl up her neck as she walked toward him, aware of 35 pairs of eyes tracking her movement. The kitchen door swung shut behind them, though Derek made no attempt to lower his voice. "You took a $600 order from that?" He jerked his thumb toward the dining room, the gesture carrying all the contempt his words implied. Derek was 45, white, with hair gelled into submission and a suit that cost more than Ellie made in a month. He'd been general manager for 2 years, and in that time, the staff turnover rate had climbed to 70%. People quit or got fired in a steady rotation, but Derek's sales numbers kept climbing, which apparently mattered more than retention to whoever made decisions at corporate. "He ordered it, Mr. Patterson. I don't see why." "Use your damn judgment. Does he look like he can afford $625? The question hung in the air between them, and Ellie felt something cold settle in her stomach. She'd been here before, not this exact situation, but close enough. The calculation every service worker learns to make, weighing the cost of speaking up against the cost of staying silent. In 3 years, she'd learned when to push back and when to fold, but something about this moment felt different. Maybe it was the way Derek had humiliated her in front of a dining room full of witnesses. Maybe it was the exhaustion of pretending dignity mattered less than keeping rich people comfortable. Or maybe it was simpler than that. She was tired of being afraid. "Company policy states all guests receive equal service regardless of appearance, sir." The words came out steady, despite the adrenaline making her pulse hammer in her throat. Derek's face flushed dark, a vein becoming visible at his temple. "Are you correcting me in front of customers?" Through the round window in the kitchen door, Ellie could see the dining room. Several tables had given up any pretense of eating, openly watching the drama unfold. Table 9, 3 businessmen in expensive suits. One of them was grinning, enjoying the spectacle of watching someone get torn down for their entertainment. "I'm quoting the employee handbook, page 47. Derek stepped closer, invading her space in a way that made Ellie's shoulders tense. She'd never feared he would get physical. Derek was too calculating for that. But he understood how to use proximity as intimidation. "When he can't pay, you're covering it. $625 from your paycheck. And I'll make sure you remember this lesson." He turned and strode back into the dining room, leaving Ellie standing in the kitchen doorway with her face burning and her hands shaking. Through the window, she watched Derek approach table 14, his posture shifting into the obsequious courtesy reserved for paying customers. The man, she still hadn't gotten his name, looked up as Derek launched into what was clearly an apology. The words were inaudible through the thick door, but the body language told the story. Derek gesturing, the man nodding slightly. Derek's forced smile. Then Derek walked away, and the man's eyes found Ellie through the kitchen window. For 2 seconds, their gazes locked, and Ellie saw something in his expression she couldn't quite name. Not pity, not anger. Something colder and more analytical, like he was taking inventory of a situation and filing away data for future reference. She turned away and nearly collided with Marcus, one of the line cooks. He'd been working at the Crown Jewel for 6 years, longer than anyone except the sous chef, and his face carried the weary resignation of someone who'd seen this scene play out too many times. "You okay?" "Fine." The lie tasted bitter, but what else could she say? That she was one write-up away from termination and Derek now had ammunition? That she had a 6-year-old daughter whose leukemia treatment required health insurance she only got through this job? That the medical debt already crushing her was 93 days from going to collections, and if she lost this position, she lost everything? Ellie grabbed the wine list and poured the Opus 1, watching the deep red liquid catch the light. $200 for this much wine. Her weekly grocery budget was $87, and she'd gotten skilled at making that stretch. Pasta 3 nights a week, chicken thighs instead of breasts, generic everything. Maya never complained, though Ellie saw how she looked at other kids' lunchboxes sometimes, the ones with fruit snacks and name-brand juice boxes, and sandwiches made with the bread that didn't have high fructose corn syrup in the ingredients. She set down the plate and glass with hands that didn't shake, muscle memory overriding anxiety. "Your Wagyu ribeye, sir. Is there anything else I can get you?" "No, thank you. This looks wonderful." He picked up his knife and fork, and Ellie noticed again the disconnect. His hands moved with the practiced ease of someone comfortable with formal dining, knife in the right hand, fork in the left, European style. He cut a small piece, raised it to his mouth, and chewed slowly with his eyes closed. A flicker of something crossed his face. The way he sat, posture straight despite the hunched shoulders, awareness of the room that seemed at odds with someone who should be focused on surviving. The expensive meal ordered without hesitation, the dining technique that spoke of long familiarity with establishments like this. At 9:30, she took her legally mandated 15-minute break, escaping to the alley behind the kitchen where the dumpsters created a barrier against the November wind. Chicago cold bit through her thin uniform, but the discomfort was worth it for the privacy. She pulled out her phone and checked the text from Maya's daycare. No emergencies, which meant her daughter had made it through another day without incident. The leukemia was in remission, had been for 8 months, but Ellie lived in permanent fear of the next test, the next scan, the next doctor's appointment that might show the cancer had returned. The medical bills were a special kind of torture. $127,000 in debt, accrued over 2 years of treatment. The hospital had payment plans, but even the minimum monthly amount was $860. Combined with rent, daycare, food, utilities, and the car payment on the ancient Honda that barely ran, Ellie cleared about $200 a month after expenses. $200 that should go towards savings or Maya's college fund or literally anything other than treading water, but instead got swallowed by the endless small emergencies that defined poverty. The broken water heater, the parking ticket, the school field trip fee. She was getting colder, despite her best efforts to ignore it. But the thought of going back inside made Ellie's stomach clench. 15 minutes meant she still had 7 left. Through the kitchen's back window, she could see the controlled chaos of Friday dinner service. Vicente at the grill station, Sarah working pastry, the expediter calling out orders. She'd been part of this machine for 3 years, and before that, she'd had a different life entirely. Forensic accountant. The career felt like something that had happened to a different person, though only 4 years separated that version of Ellie from this one. She'd been good at it, the pattern recognition and detail orientation that made fraud investigations satisfying in a way few other jobs could match. Foster & Associates hadn't been a prestigious firm, but it was solid and respectable, and paid enough that she'd been saving for a down payment on a condo. Then she'd found the discrepancies in Eugene Foster's handling of client trust accounts. $2.7 million moved in careful increments that would have been invisible to anyone not specifically looking. She'd reported it through proper channels, naive enough to believe that honesty mattered more than hierarchy. 2 weeks later, she'd been fired for allegedly leaking confidential client information to a competitor. The fabricated evidence was sophisticated enough that fighting it would have required lawyers she couldn't afford. The accounting community in Chicago was small and tightly networked. Word spread, interviews dried up, and then Maya's diagnosis had come, and suddenly nothing mattered except finding a job, any job that offered health insurance. The crown jewel had hired her within 2 hours of her application. Restaurants always needed servers, especially ones willing to work nights and weekends. The benefits kicked in after 60 days, which was exactly soon enough. Maya had started treatment 73 days after Ellie's first shift. The back door opened, and Marcus stuck his head out. "Derek's looking for you." Of course he was. Ellie stubbed out the cigarette she hadn't actually been smoking. She'd quit when Maya was born, and headed back inside. The kitchen warmth felt oppressive after the November cold. Steam and fryer oil, and the particular smell of high-end cooking that never quite translated to how the food tasted. Derek stood by the server station, arms crossed, expression unreadable. When he saw Ellie, his jaw tightened. "Table 14 wants the check." "I'll take care of it." She printed the bill, $625 plus automatic 20% gratuity for parties of one or more, bringing the total to $750, and placed it in the leather check presenter. Her hands were steady as she carried it across the dining room. Most tables had cleared out, the Friday rush winding down toward the final stragglers who'd nurse coffee and dessert for another hour. The man at table 14 had finished his steak, the plate scraped cleaner than most customers managed. He was writing something in a small notebook, the kind reporters used, or maybe detectives in old movies. When Ellie set down the check presenter, he closed the notebook and slipped it into his jacket pocket. "I hope everything was satisfactory, sir." "It was excellent, thank you." He opened the check presenter, glanced at the total without reaction, and pulled out a wallet. For a surreal moment, Ellie thought he might actually produce a credit card, that this entire strange encounter would conclude with a perfectly normal transaction. Then he extracted a $100 bill, and another, and another. He counted out 8 bills, laying them with deliberate precision, and added a 50 on top. $750 in cash. Ellie's brain stuttered trying to process. Homeless people didn't carry that kind of money. Couldn't carry it. The risk of robbery alone made it impossible. Which meant he wasn't homeless. Or wasn't really homeless. Or this entire situation was something else entirely that she hadn't yet figured out. "Keep the change." The words were quiet, almost lost in the ambient noise. Ellie picked up the cash, the bills worn soft from circulation, and when she looked up to thank him, he was watching her with that same assessing expression from before. "Thank you, sir. Have a good evening." She walked away with her heart hammering, taking the long route to the server station to give herself time to think. Derek intercepted her before she reached the computer. "Well?" "He paid. Cash. $750 with tip." Derek's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Surprise, suspicion, frustration that he couldn't call her out for being wrong. Finally, he settled on dismissive. "Lucky guess. Next time, use better judgment." He walked away without waiting for a response, and Ellie stood there holding $750 and trying to understand what had just happened. The cash felt normal in her hands, no different from the 10s and 20s most customers left, but nothing about this made sense. Why would someone with that kind of money dress like they've been sleeping rough? Why come to the Crown Jewel at all, instead of somewhere less likely to draw attention? Unless... The thought crystallized slowly, pieces clicking together in the way Ellie's brain used to work through financial discrepancies. Unless he was here specifically to observe. Mystery shopper programs existed in most major restaurant chains. Corporate sent people to evaluate service, quality, adherence to policy. She'd heard rumors Golden Harvest ran such a program, though no one knew exactly when or how often. And she'd just served someone who ordered an expensive meal without looking at prices, who assessed the food like he was checking quality against a standard, who paid attention to details most diners never noticed. Someone testing how staff treated customers who didn't fit the establishment's demographic profile. Someone who would report back to corporate about the general manager publicly humiliating a server for taking an order from someone who appeared poor. The possibility made Ellie's hands shake as she cashed out her drawer at the end of the shift. If she was right, Derek had just failed spectacularly. If she was wrong, she'd spent the evening spiraling into conspiracy theories about an eccentric rich person who liked dressing down. Either way, she wouldn't know until corporate made a move, and that could take weeks, or months, or never. She drove home at 11:45, the Honda's heater barely functional, radio playing the kind of soft rock that required no attention. Maya would be asleep. The overnight sitter was expensive but reliable, and Ellie would pay her $60 she couldn't afford and then collapse into bed for 6 hours before the morning routine started again. Saturday meant the lunch shift, which meant being back at the Crown Jewel by 10:30, which meant this pattern would repeat tomorrow and the day after and the day after that until something broke. The apartment complex sat in a neighborhood optimistically described as transitional, which meant the crime rate was high but declining, and the rent was correspondingly low. Ellie had lived here since Maya's diagnosis, downsizing from the two-bedroom they'd shared with her mother before the medical bills made that impossible. The studio apartment cost $2,100 a month for 400 square feet, plus a bathroom she shared with cockroaches. The overnight sitter, Mrs. Chen from 3B, stood when Ellie came through the door, gathering her knitting into a worn bag. She went down at 8:30, no problems. Ellie counted out 320s, watching her available cash dwindle. The $750 from table 14 sat in her purse, along with her other tips, another $240 from the rest of her tables. A good night by any standard, enough to maybe get ahead on the electric bill or buy Maya the winter coat she'd been needing since October. Alone, finally, Ellie checked on her daughter. Maya slept curled on her side, one arm tucked under the pillow, her face peaceful in the dim light from the street. She'd lost her hair during chemotherapy, and while it had grown back, it was still shorter than she liked, making her look younger than 6. Ellie brushed her fingers across Maya's forehead, feeling for fever from habit even though her daughter hadn't been sick in months. The leukemia had been acute lymphoblastic, diagnosed 3 days after Maya's 4th birthday, when bruising appeared that wouldn't heal, and fatigue became impossible to ignore. 2 years of treatment, chemotherapy, radiation, endless hospital stays that blurred together into one long nightmare of beeping machines and antiseptic smells. The debt had accumulated like snow in a blizzard, each bill arriving to bury them a little deeper. Even with insurance, the out-of-pocket maximums and co-pays and deductibles had destroyed any financial stability Ellie had managed to build. But Maya was in remission. 8 months and counting, each clean scan pushing them closer to the 5-year mark that meant cure rather than just temporary reprieve. Ellie lived for those scans, dreaded them in equal measure, because every 3 months brought the possibility that the cancer had returned, and everything they'd survived had been only a prelude. She changed into the oversized t-shirt she slept in and brushed her teeth with toothpaste that was nearly gone, squeezing the tube from the bottom to extract every last bit. The bathroom mirror showed a 26-year-old woman who looked 35, exhaustion written in the lines around her eyes and the tension in her jaw. When had she gotten so tired? Not physically tired, though that too, but the deeper exhaustion of someone who'd been running on fumes for years with no end visible. Sleep came hard despite the fatigue, her brain refusing to quiet. She kept seeing the man from table 14, the way he'd assessed the stake, the precision of his cash payment. Kept wondering if she'd imagined the whole mystery shopper theory, if desperation had made her see significance where none existed. Kept calculating whether the night's tips would be enough to cover both the electric bill and Maya's winter coat, or if she'd need to choose. The alarm dragged her conscious at 6:15, 5 hours of broken sleep, leaving her groggy and disoriented. Maya was still asleep, which gave Ellie time to shower and put on enough makeup to look presentable. Saturday meant the lunch shift, 11 to 4, which was better than dinner service, but paid less. Lunch customers tipped lighter, ordered cheaper, turned tables faster. She'd clear maybe $150 if she was lucky. At 8, she woke Maya, who complained sleepily about the early hour, before remembering it was Saturday, and that meant daycare had cartoons during breakfast. Ellie dropped her off at 9, paying $45 for the weekend day rate, and sat in the parking lot for 10 minutes after because she was early and had nowhere else to go. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Just checking in. Love you both." The message carried weight beyond its simple words. Her mother asking, without asking, if Ellie needed money, if the bills were under control, if Maya's health remained stable. Ellie typed back a quick response. "We're good. Talk soon." Another lie, but a necessary one. Her mother was 62 and worked retail at Target because her Social Security wasn't enough to live on. She couldn't help financially even if Ellie asked, which she wouldn't. The crown jewel looked different in morning light, less glamorous without the chandeliers glowing and the dinner crowd creating atmosphere. Ellie changed into her uniform, black pants, white button-down, the vest that marked her as server rather than host or busser, and headed to the floor at 10:45. Derek's BMW sat in its reserved spot, which meant he'd arrived early. Unusual for a Saturday. He typically showed up around 1, after the lunch rush had started, but before the dinner prep kicked into gear. Ellie felt unease prickle across her shoulders as she clocked in, some instinct warning her the early arrival meant nothing good. The dining room was empty except for 2 servers setting up their stations and Amber at the host stand, organizing menus. Everything looked normal. Ellie started her opening tasks, checking salt and pepper shakers, wiping down tables, making sure each place setting had the correct silverware arrangement, and tried to shake the sense that something was coming. At 11:15, Derek emerged from his office. His expression was unreadable, but he scanned the dining room until his eyes landed on Ellie. "My office. Now." The words hit like a punch. Ellie's stomach dropped, her mind immediately racing through possibilities. She'd done something wrong last night, beyond the public disagreement. Someone had complained. Corporate had called about the mystery shopper, and the news was bad. She was being fired. She followed Derek across the dining room, aware of Amber and the other servers watching, aware that whatever was about to happen would become restaurant gossip within minutes. Derek's office was small and cluttered, dominated by a desk covered in invoices and inventory reports. He didn't sit, didn't invite her to sit, just closed the door and crossed his arms. "I've been reviewing your file. 47 schedule change requests in 36 months. That's excessive." The accusation caught Ellie off guard. She'd expected fallout from last night, not an attack on her scheduling. "My daughter has medical appointments, Mr. Patterson. I always find coverage." "This is a business, not a charity. I need reliability." The unfairness of it stole her breath. She'd worked every shift she'd committed to, had never called out sick, had stayed late dozens of times when other servers failed to show. The schedule changes were always submitted weeks in advance, always approved by Derek himself, and now he was weaponizing them. Long pause. Ellie could feel her heartbeat in her throat, waiting for the blow to fall. Then Derek's expression shifted slightly, calculation replacing anger. "However, your upsell numbers are top 3 in the restaurant. Wine pairing suggestions drive revenue. So I'll give you one more chance, but no more schedule requests. Clear?" Relief and confusion fought for dominance. He wasn't firing her. But the condition was impossible. Maya had a follow-up scan in 3 weeks, therapy appointments every Tuesday, regular checkups that couldn't be rescheduled around restaurant convenience. "Yes, sir. Thank you." The words tasted like ash, gratitude for cruelty, pretending to be mercy. Derek dismissed her with a wave, already turning his attention to the paperwork on his desk. Ellie left the office and made it to the bathroom before her hands started shaking. She gripped the sink, staring at her reflection, fighting the urge to cry or scream, or both. This was the trap. This was how they kept you compliant, give you just enough hope that you couldn't afford to quit, just enough fear that you couldn't afford to fight back. Derek knew about Maya's medical needs. Everyone at the restaurant knew, which meant this wasn't ignorance or oversight. It was deliberate. The bathroom door opened and Patricia, one of the other servers, came in. She took one look at Ellie's face and her expression softened. "Derek?" Ellie nodded, not trusting her voice. "He's been worse than usual lately. Something's got him wound up." The observation pulled Ellie back from the edge of losing control. Patricia had worked at the Crown Jewel for 4 years, longer than almost anyone. If Derek was acting different, that meant something had changed. Pressure from corporate, maybe, or personal problems bleeding into his professional life. Either way, it suggested instability, and instability created opportunities. "Thanks. I'm okay." Patricia squeezed her shoulder and headed to a stall, and Ellie splashed cold water on her face. She had a lunch shift to work, tables to serve, tips to earn. Whatever Derek's problems were, they weren't hers. She just needed to keep her head down, keep Maya's insurance active, and survive until the next thing. The lunch rush started at 11:40 with a wave of customers that didn't let up until 2:30. Ellie fell into the rhythm of service, the familiar choreography of taking orders and delivering food and clearing plates. Her section was decent, a six-top of women celebrating someone's birthday, a business lunch for four, two couples on what looked like first dates. The tips were respectable, if unspectacular, exactly what she'd expected. At 2:45, during the lull between lunch and dinner prep, Ellie grabbed her phone to check messages. 3 texts from Maya's daycare, all routine updates, nothing urgent. One from her mother, "Dinner Sunday if you're free," and one from a number she didn't recognize. "Table 14 remembers what you said." Page 47. Ellie read it 3 times, her pulse accelerating with each pass. Table 14. The man from last night. He'd remembered her citation of the employee handbook, remembered it well enough to reference the specific page number, which meant he'd been paying attention in a way casual diners didn't, cataloging details and filing them away. Mystery shopper. The theory solidified from possibility to probability. Corporate had sent someone to evaluate the restaurant, and that someone had witnessed Derek's public humiliation of a server for following company policy. This text was confirmation, or as close to confirmation as she'd get without official word. But if that was true, why text her directly? Mystery shoppers reported to corporate, not to individual employees. Unless this was something else. Someone else. Ellie's fingers hovered over the keyboard, trying to decide how to respond, or if she should respond at all. The text could be from anyone, a customer who'd overheard the confrontation, another employee playing a prank, a scammer who'd somehow gotten her number. Replying would confirm the number was active, potentially opening her to more contact. She typed, "Who is this?" The response came back within 30 seconds. "Someone who appreciates integrity." The words sat on her screen, cryptic and unsettling. Ellie deleted the message thread and shoved her phone back in her pocket. She didn't have mental energy for mysteries, didn't have time for games. Whatever Table 14 wanted, it would have to wait until she had bandwidth to deal with it. The rest of her shift passed without incident. She clocked out at 4:10 with $163 in tips, slightly better than expected. Derek had disappeared into his office around 3 and hadn't emerged, which meant she could leave without another confrontation. Small mercies. Maya was waiting at daycare pickup with the drawing she'd made, stick figures labeled Maya and Mommy, holding hands under a sun with a smiley face. Ellie felt something crack in her chest looking at it. The casual innocence of a 6-year-old who didn't yet understand how fragile their stability was. "It's beautiful, baby. We'll put it on the fridge when we get home." They stopped at the grocery store on the way back, Ellie mentally calculating what she could afford this week. Pasta, jar sauce, frozen vegetables, chicken thighs, milk, cereal, peanut butter. She let Maya pick out one treat, fruit snacks in the character packaging that cost twice as much as generic, and tried not to think about the electric bill. At home, she made dinner while Maya watched cartoons, the familiar routine soothing in its predictability. They ate together on the couch because the studio didn't have space for a table, and Ellie let her daughter talk about her day without really tracking the details. Something about blocks and a boy named Thomas who'd knocked down her tower. Maya's voice carried indignation but no real hurt, and Ellie made appropriate sympathetic noises while her mind drifted. Page 47. She'd memorized the employee handbook during her first week, the way she memorized all documents that might prove useful later. Forensic accounting had trained her to pay attention to fine print, to understand that power lived in documentation. Page 47 covered service standards and specifically prohibited discrimination based on appearance or perceived economic status. She'd quoted it to Derek, knowing it would infuriate him, knowing he couldn't officially punish her for citing company policy, even if he found ways to make her life difficult. But someone had been watching. Someone who cared enough to remember. Someone who'd gotten her personal cell phone number, which meant access to employee records or enough research to find it through other channels. Mystery shopper didn't fit anymore. This felt like something else. After Maya went to bed, Ellie pulled out her laptop, the ancient machine taking 3 minutes to boot up. She Googled Golden Harvest Corporate Mystery Shopper Program and found nothing definitive, just forum posts from other restaurant employees speculating about evaluation methods. She tried variations: secret shopper, corporate quality assessment, undercover evaluation, with similar results. Then, on impulse, she Googled Billionaire CEO Undercover and hit a wall of results. Reality TV shows about executives working anonymously in their own companies, news articles about wealthy people disguising themselves to test employee behavior, an entire genre of content built around the premise of power pretending to be powerless to reveal truth. Ellie stared at the search results, a new possibility taking shape. What if Table 14 wasn't a mystery shopper at all? What if he was someone higher up the chain, someone with real authority to make changes? The company handbook listed Golden Harvest's leadership team: CEO Michael Grant, CFO Sarah Mitchell, COO Robert Taylor. She pulled up images. Michael Grant, 58 years old, net worth estimated at $11 billion. Founder of Golden Harvest Restaurants, which operated 847 locations across the United States. The photos showed a man in expensive suits, gray hair neatly styled, the kind of professional headshot that revealed nothing about personality. But if she imagined that same face under fluorescent lighting, hair messed up, wearing shabby clothes instead of tailored wool, it could fit. The age was right, late 50s. The bearing, that sense of command, even while pretending to be diminished, that would make sense for someone used to running $1 billion company. The cash payment, the assessment of food quality, the attention to service standards. It all clicked into a pattern that was either brilliant or insane. What if Michael Grant had come to the Crown Jewel in disguise? What if she'd served the CEO of Golden Harvest and he'd witnessed Derek violating company policy, and now he was texting her because why? What would a billionaire want from a server making $15 an hour? Ellie closed the laptop, suddenly exhausted. This was conspiracy thinking, the kind of paranoid speculation that came from too little sleep and too much stress. The man from Table 14 was probably exactly what he appeared to be, someone eccentric with money who liked slumming in nice restaurants. The text was probably a coincidence or prank, and Derek would continue being Derek, and she would continue surviving, and none of it mattered because she had no power to change anything. She checked on Maya one more time before bed, adjusting the blanket that had gotten kicked off, and tried not to think about the medical bills or the schedule request restriction or the texts from unknown numbers. Tomorrow was Sunday, her only day off, and she planned to spend it doing laundry and cleaning and all the other domestic tasks that got neglected during the work week. But sleep didn't come easy, and when it did, her dreams were full of crystal chandeliers and men in shabby clothes counting out $100 bills, while Derek's voice echoed through marble halls, telling her she was covering the cost, always covering the cost, until the weight of it crushed her into silence. Sunday morning arrived with rain hammering against the studio's single window, the kind of November downpour that turned Chicago streets into rivers and made everything smell like wet concrete and exhaust. Ellie woke at 7 out of habit, her body trained to the restaurant schedule even on days off. Maya was still asleep, her breathing soft and even, which meant Ellie had maybe an hour of quiet before the day truly started. She made coffee with grounds she'd been stretching for 3 days, the brew coming out weak and bitter. The text from yesterday haunted her thoughts despite deliberate attempts to forget it. Someone who appreciates integrity. The words felt designed to burrow into her brain, cryptic enough to invite speculation while revealing nothing concrete. She deleted the thread, but the number remained in her recent messages, a trail of breadcrumbs she could follow if she chose. Instead, she focused on laundry. The apartment complex had washers in the basement that cost $3 per load, and Ellie had enough quarters saved to do 2 cycles. She gathered clothes while Maya slept, sorting darks from lights with the automatic precision of someone who'd done this task 1,000 times. Her uniform shirts needed attention. One had a stain she'd been trying to remove for weeks. Another had a loose button that would fall off soon without intervention. The basement was empty at 7:30, most residents still sleeping off their Saturday nights. Ellie loaded the first washer and sat on the folding table to wait, her phone in hand before she consciously decided to check it. No new messages. Part of her felt relief, part disappointment. The mystery was seductive in a way she couldn't afford, promising something beyond the grinding sameness of her daily existence. Her mother's text from yesterday still needed a response. "Dinner Sunday if you're free." Ellie typed back. "Can't today. Rain check?" The lie came easily. She wasn't working, had no plans, could absolutely make the drive to her mother's apartment in Rogers Park, but seeing her mother meant explaining why she looked exhausted, why Maya's winter coat was too small, why the Honda's check engine light had been on for 6 weeks. It meant fielding questions Ellie didn't have good answers for, and accepting help she couldn't repay. The washer buzzed after 35 minutes. Ellie transferred wet clothes to the dryer and started the second load, the rhythm of domestic tasks creating a buffer against thought. But her mind kept circling back to Friday night, replaying the encounter with Table 14 in obsessive detail. The way he'd held his fork, the assessment in his eyes when Derek humiliated her, the precise counting of $100 bills, and the text. Page 47. Only someone who'd been present for that specific exchange would know to reference it, which narrowed the possibilities considerably. Either the man himself had her number, or someone who'd overheard the conversation had passed along information. Restaurant gossip spread fast. By now, every server and line cook at the Crown Jewel probably knew about the confrontation, but that didn't explain how her personal cell phone had entered the equation. Maya woke at 8:15, appearing in the bathroom doorway with sleep-mussed hair and the stuffed rabbit she'd had since birth. The rabbit was missing one eye and most of its stuffing, held together by repeated stitching, but Maya refused to sleep without it. "Is it still raining?" "Yeah, baby. Looks like an inside day." Disappointment crossed Maya's face. Sunday usually meant the playground if weather permitted, a chance to burn energy on swings and slides, while Ellie sat on a bench and pretended to read. Inside days were harder. The studio felt smaller when they couldn't leave, the walls pressing in until even breathing seemed to require effort. They had breakfast together, cereal with milk that would expire tomorrow, and sliced banana, because fruit was important even when the budget screamed otherwise. Maya chattered about cartoons she wanted to watch and whether they could make cookies later, her 6-year-old optimism untouched by awareness of how little they had. Ellie's phone buzzed at 9:03, unknown number, but not the same one from yesterday. Her finger hovered over the ignore button before curiosity won. "Hello? Miss Williams? This is Patricia from the Crown Jewel. Derek needs all servers at the restaurant by 1 p.m. today for mandatory meeting." The request landed like a gut punch. Sunday was Ellie's only guaranteed day off, protected by labor laws that required 1 rest day per 7-day period. Mandatory meetings happened occasionally, but always with at least 72 hours notice, allowing people to arrange childcare and transportation. 4 hours warning on her rest day violated multiple regulations. "I don't have childcare available on short notice." Derek said attendance is non-negotiable. Anyone who doesn't show is subject to disciplinary action. Patricia's voice carried apologetic strain, making it clear she was the messenger rather than the architect of this particular cruelty. Ellie closed her eyes and counted to 5, fighting the urge to say what she really thought. "I'll be there." The call disconnected, and Ellie stood in her kitchen holding the phone and trying to calculate solutions to an impossible problem. Mrs. Chen from 3B sometimes watched Maya on short notice, but charged $70 for weekend emergency care. The teenager in 2F was cheaper, but unreliable. Bringing Maya to the restaurant was absolutely prohibited. Derek had fired someone 6 months ago for that exact violation. She called Mrs. Chen and got voicemail. called the teenager and learned she was out of town, texted 3 other names from her emergency contact list, and received variations of "sorry, can't help," which left exactly one option, the one she'd been avoiding. Her mother answered on the 3rd ring. "Ellie, is everything okay?" The concern in her voice made Ellie's throat tighten. Her mother shouldn't have to worry, shouldn't have to wonder if every phone call meant crisis, but that was the reality they lived in now. "I need a favor. Can you watch Maya this afternoon? The restaurant called a mandatory meeting." Silence stretched for 3 seconds. Then her mother's voice came back, carefully neutral. "Of course. What time?" "I need to drop her off by 12:15. I can pick her up by 3. "We'll make it work. Does she need lunch?" Guilt twisted in Ellie's stomach. Her mother lived on fixed income that barely covered rent and utilities, and now Ellie was asking her to feed Maya, too. "I'll pack something. Don't worry about it. I've got chicken nuggets in the freezer. She'll be fine." The conversation ended with logistical details and forced casualness, both of them pretending this was normal rather than one more example of how fragile their stability was. Ellie hung up and found Maya watching her from the couch, the cartoon on TV forgotten. "I have to go to work for a little bit. You're going to Grandma's." "Can I come with you?" The question pierced something in Ellie's chest. Maya asked less frequently now than she had a year ago, having learned through repeated denials that Mommy's workplace wasn't somewhere children belonged. But the hope in her voice never quite disappeared, the 6-year-old belief that surely, this time, the answer might change. "Not today, baby, but Grandma's will be fun. I bet she'll let you help make cookies." The promise of cookies smoothed Maya's disappointment, and they spent the next 2 hours in quiet, domestic coexistence. Ellie folded laundry while Maya colored, the rain a constant percussion against the window. At 11:45, they drove through flooded streets to Rogers Park, the Honda's windshield wipers barely keeping pace with the downpour. Her mother lived in a 1-bedroom apartment that smelled like vanilla candles and old books, the space cluttered with the accumulated possessions of 62 years. She answered the door in her Target uniform, she worked the 2 to 9 shift on Sundays, and pulled Maya into a hug that made the little girl giggle. "Thanks, Mom. I really appreciate—" "Stop. Go. We'll be fine." The dismissal was gentle but firm, her mother's way of saying, "Don't make this harder by acknowledging how hard it is." Ellie kissed Maya goodbye and drove back through rain that seemed to be intensifying, Chicago weather at its most vindictive. The Crown Jewels parking lot held more cars than usual for a Sunday afternoon. Ellie counted 8 employee vehicles, which meant most of the serving staff had managed to comply with Derek's demand. She ran from the Honda to the back entrance, arriving soaked despite the 20-foot distance. Inside, 12 servers clustered in the break room, wearing various states of annoyance. Patricia caught Ellie's eye and shook her head fractionally, a warning that whatever this was about, it wasn't good. Derek stood at the front of the room, consulting his phone, making them wait in silence for 3 minutes before finally looking up. "Thanks for coming on short notice. Corporate requires updated training on service standards, and I've been instructed to implement it immediately." The explanation was almost believable. Golden Harvest periodically rolled out new policies, and sometimes those came with compressed timelines. But Derek's body language suggested something else. Tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes didn't quite meet anyone's gaze directly. He was nervous, which was unusual enough to spike Ellie's attention. "We're going to review the employee handbook section on customer service expectations. Everyone should have a copy. If you don't, there are extras by the door." Ellie already knew every word of the handbook, had memorized it specifically because knowledge was the only power available to someone in her position. She grabbed a copy anyway and found page 47, the section she'd quoted to Derek 2 nights ago. The section on equal service regardless of appearance. Derek launched into a presentation that was clearly scripted, reading from notes on his phone with all the enthusiasm of someone being forced at gunpoint. "Customer satisfaction drives revenue. First impressions matter. Every guest deserves excellence regardless of appearance or perceived economic status. The words were corporate boilerplate, familiar to anyone who'd worked service industry for more than a week. But the timing was extraordinary. Derek conducting remedial training on the exact policy he'd violated 72 hours ago, forced into public acknowledgement that servers should treat all customers equally. Either this was remarkable coincidence, or someone had intervened at corporate level to mandate the training. The meeting stretched to 90 minutes, Derek dragging out material that should have taken 30. He assigned everyone a quiz, 10 multiple-choice questions about service standards, and made them complete it before leaving. Ellie finished in 4 minutes and spent the remaining time watching Derek's increasing agitation as servers turned in their papers. When everyone had submitted their quizzes, Derek dismissed them without ceremony, already turning back to his phone before the first person reached the door. Ellie followed the group out, but lingered in the hallway, instinct telling her to pay attention. Through the break room's still open door, she heard Derek's voice, low and urgent. "I did what you asked. The training is documented. Yes, everyone attended." Silence while whoever was on the other end responded. Then Derek again, frustration bleeding through his attempted professionalism. "I understand that customer complaints are taken seriously, but this seems like overreaction to one incident." More silence. Derek's knuckles went white around his phone. "Yes, sir. I understand. It won't happen again." The call ended and Ellie moved quickly, not wanting to be caught obviously eavesdropping. She made it to the parking lot before her brain fully processed what she'd overheard. Customer complaint. Corporate demanding training. Derek forced to acknowledge his violation of company policy, which meant someone had reported Friday night's incident. Someone with enough authority that corporate took the complaint seriously enough to mandate immediate remedial action. Mystery Shopper would explain it, except mystery shoppers didn't typically trigger responses this fast or this specific. The rain had diminished to drizzle by the time Ellie reached her car. She sat in the driver's seat with the engine running and heater struggling, trying to assemble pieces of a puzzle that refused to form coherent picture. The text referencing page 47, Derek's mandatory training on that exact policy. The timing too precise to be coincidence. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number, the original one from yesterday. "How was the meeting?" Ellie stared at the message, her pulse accelerating. Whoever this was had known about the meeting before she did, had anticipated Derek would be forced to conduct training, which meant access to corporate decision-making or direct involvement in those decisions. She typed, "Who are you?" The response came within seconds. "Someone who believes you deserve better than Derek Patterson's management style." The words bypassed her defenses entirely. Whoever this was had witnessed Friday night, understood the power dynamic, and seemed genuinely interested in addressing it. But that raised more questions than it answered. "Ellie, what do you want?" "To give you an opportunity. Check your personal email tonight." The conversation ended there, no matter how many times Ellie refreshed the screen. She drove to her mother's apartment on autopilot, barely registering the route. Maya came running when she arrived, chocolate on her face and excitement in her voice. "Grandma let me help make brownies." Her mother appeared behind Maya, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "We had a good afternoon. She's welcome any time." The unspoken message beneath the words, "I know you're struggling, I wish I could do more." Ellie hugged her mother with sudden fierce gratitude for the ways they helped each other survive, the small acts of support that made impossible situations merely unbearable. At home, she fed Maya dinner and put her to bed early, claiming exhaustion that wasn't entirely fabricated. Then she opened her laptop and navigated to the email account she rarely checked, the one she'd created when applying for jobs 4 years ago. One new message. Sender, m.grant@goldenharvestcorp.com. Subject line, opportunity. Ellie's hands went numb. M.Grant. Michael Grant, CEO of Golden Harvest. which meant her conspiracy theory from yesterday wasn't conspiracy at all, but accurate assessment of an improbable situation. The man from table 14 had been the billionaire founder of the company, and he just emailed her personal account. She clicked the message open. Ms. Williams, I hope this message finds you well. We haven't been formally introduced, though I had the pleasure of dining at your table on Friday evening. I was the guest at table 14, the one your manager deemed unworthy of quality service based solely on appearance. I wanted to personally thank you for your professionalism and adherence to company values in a difficult situation. The way you cited page 47 of our employee handbook demonstrated both knowledge of policy and courage in defending those principles despite clear pressure from management. I also wanted to apologize. You should never have been placed in that position. Derek Patterson's behavior violated multiple company policies and created a hostile work environment. Today's mandatory training was first step in addressing that failure. However, I'm writing because I believe you deserve more than an apology. In reviewing Crown Jewel's performance data, I've identified concerning patterns that extend beyond Friday's incident. I would like to discuss these matters with you directly, but only if you're comfortable with such a conversation. If you're willing to meet, please call the number below at your convenience. This is my direct line. No assistants, no intermediaries. Anything we discuss will be completely confidential. Sincerely, Michael Grant, founder and CEO, Golden Harvest Restaurants. A phone number followed the signature, 10 digits that represented access to the most powerful person in the company. Ellie read the email 3 times, each pass revealing new implications. Michael Grant had dined at the Crown Jewel in disguise, specifically to observe service quality. He'd witnessed Derek's violation. He'd intervened at corporate level to mandate training, and now he wanted to discuss concerning patterns with a server making $15 an hour. The professional language couldn't quite hide what this was. A billionaire recruiting her for something. Whistleblowing, maybe. Internal investigation. Some corporate initiative that required ground-level perspective. Whatever it was came with risk she couldn't yet calculate. But the alternative was maintaining status quo indefinitely. Eric's harassment, impossible schedule restrictions, tips that never quite covered expenses, the medical debt growing despite payment plans. Maya's future mortgaged against Ellie's inability to escape the trap of service work. She could ignore the email, pretend she'd never seen it, continue serving tables and surviving day to day. That was the safe choice, the smart choice for someone with a 6-year-old who needed stability more than justice. Or she could call the number, step into unknown territory, and see if the most powerful person at Golden Harvest actually meant what his email suggested, that he believed she deserved better. Ellie stared at the screen until her eyes burned. The choice wasn't really a choice at all, had never been. She'd reported Eugene Foster's embezzlement, knowing it would cost her career. She'd quoted page 47 to Derek, knowing it would make him an enemy. Some part of her was fundamentally incapable of staying silent, when staying silent meant accepting cruelty as inevitable. She picked up her phone and dialed before doubt could override determination. 3 rings, then a male voice she recognized from Friday night. Michael Grant? Mr. Grant, this is Ellie Williams. I'm calling about your email. Ms. Williams, thank you for calling. I know this must feel unusual. You came to the restaurant in disguise. The words came out more accusation than question. A pause on the other end, then what might have been a quiet laugh. I did. I've been doing that periodically for the past 18 months, visiting different locations to observe operations without the performance that happens when staff know the CEO is present. Friday was my first visit to the Crown Jewel in almost 2 years. And you just happened to be there when Derek violated company policy? Actually, I witnessed Derek violate policy multiple times during my 2-hour visit. The incident with your table was simply the most egregious example. Ellie sat down on her couch, the laptop still open to the email. Maya's soft breathing came from the bed across the room, a reminder that this conversation had stakes beyond corporate politics. Your email mentioned concerning patterns. What patterns? The Crown Jewel's employee turnover rate is 73% annually, nearly double the company average. Customer complaint volume has increased 42% in the past year, and profits are up 17% despite declining service quality, which suggests cost-cutting measures that prioritize short-term revenue over long-term sustainability. The statistics came out crisp and precise. Someone who'd done his homework speaking to someone he assumed would appreciate data. So you want me to confirm your suspicions about Derek's management?
I want to understand what's happening at one of our flagship locations, but I'm not asking you to betray confidences or put yourself at risk. This conversation is entirely voluntary. The careful phrasing reminded Ellie he was talking to someone without power, someone who could be fired or retaliated against. But it also suggested Michael Grant understood the dynamics better than most executives. What happens if I tell you what I know? That depends on what you know. If it confirms my suspicions about systematic policy violations, I'll take action at corporate level. If it reveals information I wasn't aware of, I'll investigate further. Either way, your name stays confidential unless you explicitly authorize otherwise. And if I don't want to talk? Then we end this call and you never hear from me again. I'm not in the business of coercing employees. Ellie closed her eyes and thought about Friday night, Derek's public humiliation, the way diners had laughed at her discomfort, the $625 she'd been threatened with paying, the schedule restriction that made attending Maya's medical appointments impossible, the years of accumulated small cruelties that added up to unbearable weight. Derek's been stealing from the restaurant. The words came out before conscious decision, bypassing all the careful calculations about risk and consequence. Silence on the other end of the call, but not empty silence, the focused quiet of someone paying complete attention. What kind of theft? Supplier fraud. He's billing corporate for premium ingredients but purchasing lower-grade products. The difference goes into his pocket, along with the head chef and supply manager. How long has this been going on? At least 9 months, maybe longer. I noticed discrepancies about 6 months ago, but didn't have access to verify until... Ellie stopped herself, suddenly aware she was confessing to her own policy violations. Accessing records she had no authorization to see would justify immediate termination, regardless of what those records revealed. Until you used your forensic accounting background to investigate. The statement landed like a punch. Michael Grant had researched her, knew about her previous career, understood exactly what skill set she brought to this conversation, which meant this call wasn't spontaneous at all, but carefully orchestrated. You knew before you called me. I suspected. Your LinkedIn profile mentions 2 years at Foster & Associates, specializing in fraud investigation. It seemed unlikely someone with that training wouldn't notice irregularities in restaurant operations. Anger flared hot in Ellie's chest, the feeling of being manipulated overriding fear. So this whole thing is entrapment. You got me to confess to accessing unauthorized records so you can fire me and pretend Ms. Williams. I'm not trying to entrap you. I'm trying to understand the scope of the problem at the Crown Jewel. If Derek Patterson is running supplier fraud, that's a criminal matter that affects the entire company. Your insight is valuable, and I'm not interested in punishing you for discovering information that corporate should have caught months ago. The sincerity in his voice punctured her anger, leaving behind exhaustion. Ellie rubbed her eyes with her free hand. Why does any of this matter to you? You're worth $11 billion. One restaurant's fraud is rounding error. Because I built this company on the principle that we treat people with dignity, employees and customers both. Every location that violates those principles is a personal failure. And because fraud at one restaurant suggests systematic oversight failures that could be happening elsewhere. The explanation made sense intellectually, but Ellie's experience had taught her that people with power rarely acted against their own interests without motivation beyond abstract principles. What do you want from me specifically? Evidence. Documentation of the fraud if you have it. Names of other employees who might have information. Anything that helps me build a case strong enough to take to law enforcement. And in exchange? Protection. Whistleblower status that prevents Derek from retaliating. continued employment with schedule flexibility for your daughter's medical needs. And if your information leads to prosecution, you're entitled to percentage of recovered funds under federal whistleblower statutes. The offer was almost too good, the kind of thing that happened in movies rather than real life, which meant it was either genuine or designed to extract information before disposing of her. I need time to think. Of course. Take as much time as you need.
My direct number is the one you called. Reach out when you've made a decision. The conversation ended without ceremony, leaving Ellie alone with her laptop and the weight of impossible choice. She could provide evidence of Derek's fraud and potentially gain protection and compensation. Or she could stay silent, keep her head down, and hope that Derek's inevitable discovery didn't splash back on her. Except staying silent had never been her strength. Some people were built to absorb injustice without resistance, to survive by becoming small and invisible. Ellie had tried that approach after Eugene Foster destroyed her accounting career. She'd swallowed her anger, accepted minimum wage, and convinced herself that survival was victory enough. But survival wasn't victory. It was just slower dying. She opened a new browser tab and searched for federal whistleblower protection statutes. The results were dense with legal language, but the core concept was clear. Employees who reported fraud were protected from retaliation, and if their information led to recovery of funds, they received 15 to 30% of the recovered amount. If Derek had been stealing for 9 months, the numbers could be substantial. Premium Wagyu billed at $31 per pound, but purchased at $13, meant $18 per pound in fraud. The crown jewel went through approximately 60 pounds of high-end beef per week, which translated to over $50,000 annually. Multiply that across other premium ingredients, and the total could easily exceed $200,000. 15% of $200,000 was $30,000, enough to eliminate more than 20% of Maya's medical debt, enough to buy breathing room, to maybe stop living paycheck to paycheck in constant crisis mode. But only if Michael Grant was genuine. Only if this wasn't an elaborate scheme to identify troublemakers and eliminate them under cover of internal investigation. Ellie had been burned before by trusting authority figures who claimed to value integrity. She needed more information before committing. Needed to verify Michael Grant was who he claimed, that his promises had weight beyond words. She searched for news articles about Golden Harvest and found dozens. The company was privately held, but large enough to generate regular coverage. Most articles focused on expansion plans or quarterly performance, standard business journalism. Then she found a profile from 3 years ago in Forbes. Michael Grant had built Golden Harvest from a single restaurant in 1994 to a national chain through combination of aggressive expansion and fanatical attention to quality. The article described him as hands-on to the point of micromanagement, someone who personally visited locations and maintained final approval on major operational decisions. It also mentioned his wife had died of cancer in 2021 and that he'd subsequently donated $50 million to pediatric oncology research. The detail hit Ellie like electricity. Michael Grant understood medical debt, understood what it meant to watch someone you loved fight disease while bills piled up beyond comprehension. Maybe that's why he'd really called. Not corporate duty or abstract principle, but genuine empathy for someone trapped in circumstances he recognized. Or maybe she was projecting, seeing what she wanted to see, because the alternative was too bleak to accept. Ellie closed the laptop and checked on Maya, who'd kicked off her blanket in sleep. She tucked it back around her daughter's small form and stood watching for a moment, memorizing the peace of her face. Whatever decision Ellie made would affect Maya's future, would either provide stability or introduce new chaos. The smart choice was obvious. Provide Michael Grant with evidence, claim whistleblower protection, take the financial reward if it materialized. Derek was stealing, and stopping theft wasn't betrayal but basic ethics. But Ellie had learned the hard way that doing the right thing didn't guarantee right outcomes. She'd reported Eugene Foster's embezzlement and lost her career. She'd cited company policy to Derek and gained an enemy. Every time she'd stood up for principle over pragmatism, the cost had been immediate and personal. Still, the alternative was watching Derek continue stealing while treating staff like disposable resources. Was modeling for Maya that injustice should be tolerated? That speaking truth to power was foolish naivete? Her phone buzzed at 10:15. Unknown number, the one Michael Grant had called from. I realize this is difficult. Whatever you decide, thank you for considering it. The message felt genuine, absent any pressure or manipulation. Ellie stared at it for 30 seconds before typing a response. Ellie, I need proof this is real, that you are who you claim, and that whistleblower protection means something. Understandable. I'll have corporate counsel send you documentation tomorrow morning. Official letter confirming protection, contact information for legal team, outline of whistleblower rights under federal statute. You can verify everything independently. The promise was specific enough to be checkable, which suggested confidence it would hold up to scrutiny. Ellie set down her phone and tried to sleep, but her brain refused to quiet. She kept replaying Friday night, the weight of Derek's contempt, the way Michael Grant had watched her with eyes that saw more than she'd realized. Morning came too early, Maya waking at 6:30 with energy that defied the previous day's late bedtime. Ellie made breakfast and got them both ready for Monday's routine. Daycare drop-off, lunch shift at the Crown Jewel, the familiar choreography of survival. But everything felt different now, charged with potential that hadn't existed 72 hours ago. At 9:03, her personal email pinged with new message. Sender, j.morgan@goldenharvestcorp.com. Subject, Whistleblower Protection Documentation. The email contained 3 attachments: a letter on Golden Harvest letterhead confirming Ellie's protected status as confidential informant, a summary of federal whistleblower statutes, and contact information for the company's legal team with explicit instruction that they represented Ellie's interests rather than Golden Harvest's. The letter was signed by James Morgan, Senior Corporate Counsel, and included phone number plus Maryland bar registration that Ellie could verify through public record. She spent 20 minutes confirming every detail. James Morgan was indeed licensed attorney employed by Golden Harvest. The letterhead matched official company documents available online. The whistleblower statute summary was accurate according to independent legal sites. Everything checked out, which meant Michael Grant had followed through on his promise, with speed suggesting this mattered to him personally. Ellie read the protection letter 3 more times, absorbing the language that promised Derek couldn't fire her, couldn't reduce her hours, couldn't retaliate in any way without triggering federal penalties. She called the number Michael Grant had provided. He answered on the second ring. Ms. Williams. I received the documentation. It looks legitimate. It is. James Morgan is the best corporate counsel in the industry, and he takes whistleblower protection seriously. Ellie took a breath that felt like stepping off a cliff. Okay, I'll help you. But I need one thing first. Name it. I want to meet in person. No phones, no emails. Face to face so I can see who I'm actually dealing with. Silence for 3 seconds. Then Michael Grant's voice came back, and she could hear the smile in it. That's the smartest thing anyone has said to me in months. When and where? They agreed on Tuesday afternoon, Ellie's next day off. Neutral location, a coffee shop in Lincoln Park, public enough to be safe, but quiet enough to talk. The call ended, and Ellie sat in her car outside Maya's daycare trying to process what she'd just set in motion. She'd agreed to meet a billionaire to discuss exposing her manager's criminal activity. The sentence sounded insane, no matter how many times she rephrased it. But the alternative? Continuing to serve Derek Patterson's tables while he stole and lied and treated everyone beneath him like obstacles to profit. That was its own kind of insanity. The lunch shift passed in blur of automatic service. Derek was absent, which meant the dining room operated with unusual calm. Servers moved efficiently through their sections, kitchen sent up orders without drama, and the lack of tension made clear how much Derek's presence normally poisoned the atmosphere. Patricia cornered Ellie during the 3 p.m. lull, her expression concerned. You okay? You've been somewhere else all day. Just tired. Maya had trouble sleeping.
The lie came smoothly, but Patricia's eyes narrowed in the way of someone who'd worked service long enough to recognize deflection. Derek's been weird lately. Jumpy. Like he's waiting for something bad. The observation aligned with Ellie's own assessment. Derek's nervousness during Sunday's mandatory training, the overheard phone call about customer complaints, the tension that radiated from him even in absence. Someone under pressure from forces they couldn't control. Maybe corporate's finally paying attention. Patricia's eyebrows rose.
That would be a first. Golden Harvest doesn't usually care what happens at individual locations as long as profit margins stay healthy. Maybe they should care more. The words came out sharper than intended. Patricia studied Ellie for a long moment, and something shifted in her expression. Recognition of shared frustration, perhaps, or understanding that whatever Ellie was dealing with went beyond normal workplace stress. If you need anything, let me know. We've got to look out for each other. The offer carried weight of genuine support, the solidarity of people surviving the same grinding circumstances. Ellie felt sudden, fierce affection for this woman she'd worked beside for 3 years without really knowing. Thanks. I appreciate that. The shift ended at 4, and Ellie drove to pick up Maya, the autumn light already fading toward early winter darkness. Chicago cold was settling in for real now, the kind that made waiting for buses miserable and turned homeless people into frozen casualties. She thought about Michael Grant, disguised as one of those casualties, experiencing for 2 hours what others endured indefinitely. Maybe that's what made him different. He'd chosen to see what most people in his position actively avoided, the reality of how his company treated the vulnerable. And instead of looking away, he decided to do something about it. Or maybe Ellie was being naive again, seeing nobility where only self-interest existed. Tuesday's meeting would reveal which version was accurate. Maya was full of stories about her day, something involving blocks and a new friend and juice that spilled everywhere. Ellie listened and made appropriate responses while her mind spun through scenarios for tomorrow's meeting. What questions to ask? What information to share? How to verify Michael Grant's motivations beyond the documentation that could be faked or manipulated. At home, she made dinner and supervised homework. Kindergarten level, but Maya took it seriously and got her daughter to bed by 8. Then Ellie pulled out the notebook she'd been keeping since she first noticed irregularities in the Crown Jewels operations. 6 months of observations, recorded in careful detail. Dates when premium ingredients arrived, but invoices showed different quantities. Conversations overheard between Derek and suppliers. The pattern of Sunday afternoon meetings in Derek's office with Vincent and Rachel, always behind closed door. Small inconsistencies that individually meant nothing, but collectively painted picture of systematic fraud. She documented everything from habit, the forensic accountant in her unable to ignore evidence even when she had no authority to act on it. Now those notes represented ammunition, leverage, potential protection, assuming Michael Grant was genuine. Assuming whistleblower status meant what the legal documents promised. Assuming this wasn't a trap designed to identify and eliminate the one person who'd noticed what everyone else missed. She documented everything from habit, the forensic accountant in her unable to ignore evidence even when she had no authority to act on it. Now those notes represented ammunition, leverage, potential protection. Assuming Michael Grant was genuine. Assuming whistleblower status meant what the legal documents promised. Assuming this wasn't a trap designed to identify and eliminate the one person who'd noticed what everyone else missed. At 9, timeline accelerated. FBI moving faster than anticipated. Derek's termination will happen within 72 hours. Agent Harris will contact you tomorrow to schedule formal interview. Be ready. Ellie read the message 3 times, each pass making her pulse accelerate. 72 hours. 3 days, maximum, before Derek was removed and everything changed. The abstract future she'd been contemplating had suddenly become concrete and immediate. She typed back with shaking hands. What changed? The Supreme Meat's supplier investigation revealed Derek has been running this scheme at multiple Golden Harvest locations, not just Crown Jewel. Total fraud may exceed $800,000. FBI treating this as organized criminal enterprise. They want to move before he destroys evidence or flees. $800,000. The number was staggering, so far beyond what Ellie had calculated that her brain struggled to process it. If the fraud was that extensive, her 15% whistleblower reward could be over $100,000, enough to eliminate Maya's medical debt entirely, enough to change everything, but only if she survived the next 72 hours without Derek discovering what she'd set in motion. Ellie stood at her window, staring out at the parking lot, the Honda's check engine light glowing in the darkness. Everything was about to change. Her job, her financial situation, possibly her entire future. And unlike every other time her life had shifted beneath her feet, this time she'd chosen it, deliberately stepped into the chaos instead of being swept along by circumstances. She checked on Maya one final time, memorizing the peace of her daughter's sleeping face. Whatever happened next, she'd done it for this, for the chance to give Maya stability instead of constant crisis, opportunity instead of limitation. Her phone buzzed again. Different unknown number. Ms. Williams, this is FBI agent Lisa Harris. I need to interview you tomorrow, Tuesday, at 2 p.m. Chicago Field Office, 2111 West Roosevelt Road. This is urgent. Please confirm receipt of this message. Ellie's hands went numb. Tomorrow. Not later this week or when convenient. Tomorrow afternoon, which meant arranging emergency childcare and explaining to her mother why she needed help on such short notice. She typed back, "Confirmed. I'll be there." The die was cast now. No turning back, no changing her mind, no pretending she could walk away from what she'd started. In less than 24 hours, she'd be sitting in FBI interview room, providing testimony that would destroy Derek Patterson's life. And in 72 hours or less, she'd find out whether her courage had been wisdom or catastrophic mistake. Ellie set her phone on the nightstand and tried to sleep, knowing it was futile. Her mind spun through scenarios and consequences, calculating risks she couldn't fully assess. But beneath the anxiety was something else. A fierce satisfaction that she'd refused to stay silent, that she'd chosen integrity over safety, despite every lesson experience had taught her. Some people were built to absorb injustice without resistance. Ellie had never been one of them. For better or worse, she was about to find out what that cost. The place was upscale casual, exposed brick walls, reclaimed wood tables, pour-over coffee that cost $6. Ellie ordered the cheapest thing on the menu and claimed a corner table with sightlines to both entrance and exit. Old habit from her accounting days, always knowing where the doors were. The coffee was excellent, which made sense given the price. She nursed it slowly while watching customers come and go, mostly professionals taking late morning breaks, a few students with laptops, one elderly couple sharing a muffin. Normal Tuesday activity in a neighborhood where median income was triple what Ellie made annually. At 1:57, a black sedan pulled up outside and Michael Grant emerged. He wore charcoal suit without tie, the kind of business casual that probably cost more than her monthly rent. His hair was styled, face clean-shaven, bearing completely different from the hunched homeless persona. Power radiated from him in the subtle way of people accustomed to commanding rooms. He entered the coffee shop and scanned the space with practiced efficiency. His eyes landed on Ellie, and something flickered across his expression, recognition mixed with assessment. He ordered at the counter, exchanged pleasantries with the barista, then walked to her table carrying what looked like plain black coffee. "Ms. Williams, thank you for meeting me." Up close, he was older than she'd initially thought, probably early 60s, despite the executive grooming. Lines around his eyes suggested someone who smiled frequently, though his current expression was serious. "Mr. Grant?" He sat across from her without asking permission, settling into the chair with ease that spoke to comfort in any environment. For a moment, neither spoke, the silence stretching into territory that wasn't quite awkward, but definitely charged. "You wanted to meet face to face. Smart decision. Trust should be earned, not demanded." The acknowledgement disarmed her slightly. Ellie had expected corporate doublespeak or attempts at manipulation. Instead, he was being direct. "I need to know this is real, that you actually care about stopping Derek's fraud, and not just gathering evidence to eliminate a problem employee." "Fair question. The honest answer is, both can be true simultaneously. I do care about stopping fraud. It undermines everything Golden Harvest is supposed to represent. And yes, employees who steal are problems that need eliminating. He took a sip of coffee, expression thoughtful. But you're not the problem employee in this scenario. You're the one who noticed what our corporate oversight failed to catch. That makes you valuable, not disposable. Valuable until I'm not, until the investigation concludes and suddenly there's no protection from a manager who knows I reported him. Whistleblower protection isn't temporary.
Federal statute prohibits retaliation for the duration of your employment and 5 years beyond termination. If Derek retaliates in any way, he's committing federal crime. And more practically, Derek won't be your manager much longer. The statement landed with weight. Ellie set down her coffee. You're planning to fire him? I'm planning to build a case strong enough that law enforcement arrests him. Termination is automatic consequence of criminal charges. But I need evidence, documentation, witness testimony, financial records that prove systematic fraud. Which you expect me to provide. I'm asking if you're willing to provide it. There's a difference. Michael Grant leaned back in his chair, expression open. I did my research before contacting you. Forensic accountant at Foster & Associates, until you reported your senior partner's embezzlement. Fired under fabricated charges, blacklisted in Chicago's accounting community, forced into service work to maintain health insurance for your daughter's leukemia treatment. You've already paid the price for doing the right thing once. I understand why you're hesitant to do it again. Hearing her history summarized so clinically made Ellie's chest tighten. She'd spent 4 years trying to move past the Foster & Associates disaster to rebuild some version of stability. Now a billionaire was asking her to blow up that stability based on promises he might not keep. If I help you, what happens to me, specifically? You continue working at the Crown Jewel with schedule flexibility for Maya's medical needs. Derek gets removed, new management comes in, and your whistleblower status ensures no retaliation. When the fraud case settles, and it will settle, criminal or civil, you receive 15 to 30% of recovered funds as mandated by federal statute.
And if the case doesn't settle? If Derek gets acquitted or the charges get dropped? Unlikely, given the evidence I've already accumulated. But even in that scenario, your protection holds. The statute doesn't require conviction, only good faith reporting of suspected fraud. The framework sounded solid, but Ellie had learned that promises and reality often diverged. Show me what you've already accumulated. Michael Grant smiled, genuine warmth breaking through the executive veneer. I was hoping you'd ask. He pulled out a tablet and navigated to a folder labeled Crown Jewel Investigation. Inside were photographs, the same kind Ellie would have taken if conducting formal audit. Invoices from suppliers showing discrepancies between delivered quantities and billed amounts. Spreadsheets tracking premium ingredient costs over 18 months with trend lines that revealed suspicious patterns. Bank records showing deposits into Derek's personal account that aligned with invoice manipulation dates. How did you get bank records? Legally dubious methods I'm not going to detail. But once we turn this over to FBI, they'll obtain proper warrants and everything becomes admissible. He scrolled to another section showing photographs from inside the Crown Jewel's walk-in freezer, meat packages with visible labels that didn't match premium grades being billed. The images were dated from last Saturday. Michael Grant had returned to the restaurant during Sunday's mandatory training and documented everything. You broke in. I own the building. Accessing my own property isn't breaking and entering. The legal distinction was probably arguable, but it demonstrated commitment beyond what Ellie had expected. Michael Grant wasn't just asking her to take risks, he was taking them himself. What exactly do you need from me? Your notebook, the one you've been keeping with dated observations of suspicious activity. Testimony about conversations you overheard between Derek, Vincent, and Rachel, and access to any internal documents that might corroborate the timeline. Ellie's hands went cold around her coffee cup. The notebook was insurance, evidence she'd collected in case she ever needed leverage. Turning it over meant trusting Michael Grant completely. If I give you the notebook and this goes sideways, I have nothing protecting me. You'll have federal whistleblower status, my personal guarantee of continued employment, and legal representation from Golden Harvest's corporate counsel. That's more protection than most people get. Your personal guarantee. What's that worth if you decide I'm inconvenient? The question came out harder than intended, but Michael Grant didn't flinch. My wife died of pancreatic cancer 3 years ago. The medical bills, even with excellent insurance, were catastrophic. I know what it's like to watch someone you love suffer while administrators debate coverage and creditors send threatening letters. When I saw you with your daughter's medical debt, serving tables to maintain insurance, getting humiliated by a manager, stealing from the company that employs you, that's not abstract injustice. That's someone living the nightmare I barely survived. His voice remained steady, but something raw flickered beneath the words. Ellie felt her defensive walls crack slightly. I'm not asking you to trust blindly. I'm asking you to weigh the evidence and make informed decision. Everything I've promised is documented in writing. Everything I've claimed about whistleblower protection is verifiable through independent sources. And everything I'm asking you to do serves both your interests and the company's. The argument was logical, almost too perfect, which made Ellie's forensic instincts flare. What's the catch? The piece you're not telling me. Michael Grant set down his coffee and met her eyes directly. The catch is that once you testify, once your name appears in investigation records, you become visible. People at Golden Harvest will know you cooperated with corporate against Derek. Some will view you as hero, others will view you as traitor. The dynamics at the Crown Jewel will shift in ways neither of us can predict. And you'll be protected by billions of dollars while I'm still serving tables. Yes, that's the structural inequality we're operating within. I can't change it, but I can use my position to provide resources you wouldn't have access to otherwise. The honesty was disarming. Ellie had expected platitudes about fairness or vague promises. Instead, Michael Grant acknowledged the power differential explicitly. I need time to think. Of course. Take whatever time. No, I need 10 minutes alone to think. Can you wait outside? Surprise crossed his features, followed by what looked like respect. Absolutely. He stood and walked out of the coffee shop, leaving his tablet on the table. The gesture was probably calculated, showing trust by leaving expensive technology in her custody, but it worked anyway. Ellie picked up the tablet and scrolled through the investigation folder, examining every piece of evidence Michael Grant had compiled. The documentation was thorough and professionally organized. Invoices from 3 different suppliers showing consistent patterns of overbilling, bank deposits that correlated with invoice dates within 48-hour windows, photographs of inferior products labeled as premium grades, email exchanges between Derek and suppliers that referenced special arrangements and adjusted pricing. More damning was the spreadsheet tracking costs across all Golden Harvest locations. The Crown Jewel's meat expenditures were 17% below company average, despite menu prices being identical. The statistical anomaly was glaring once you knew to look for it. If this evidence went to law enforcement, Derek was finished. Criminal charges were inevitable, conviction highly probable, which meant Ellie's cooperation would determine whether the investigation happened quickly, with minimal collateral damage, or slowly, with maximum disruption to innocent employees. She thought about Patricia working double shifts to support her mother, about Marcus, the line cook, who'd been at the Crown Jewel for 6 years, about the dozen other servers and kitchen staff whose livelihoods depended on the restaurant continuing to operate. If Derek's fraud became public scandal, corporate might close the location entirely, rather than deal with negative publicity. But staying silent guaranteed Derek would continue stealing, continue creating hostile environment, continue treating employees as disposable resources. And eventually, whether through internal audit or external investigation, the fraud would be discovered anyway, at which point Ellie would be questioned about what she knew and when she knew it. The choice wasn't between safety and risk. It was between controlled risk with protection and uncontrolled risk without it. She walked to the coffee shop entrance and gestured to Michael Grant. He returned to the table, expression neutral. "I'll cooperate, but I have conditions." "Name them." "First, any legal proceedings happen under seal. My name doesn't appear in public documents until absolutely necessary." "Agreed. Federal whistleblower cases often proceed under seal to protect informants." "Second, I want guaranteed employment for everyone at the Crown Jewel who isn't involved in the fraud."
No using this as excuse to close the location. Michael Grant's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's generous, considering Derek made your life miserable."
Derek made everyone's life miserable. But Patricia and Marcus and the others didn't do anything wrong. They deserve stability. I can't guarantee no layoffs if the location becomes unprofitable, but I can commit to transferring employees to other Golden Harvest restaurants within reasonable commuting distance if closure becomes necessary. The compromise was fair. Ellie nodded. "Third, I want the legal team's contact information verified before I hand over any documentation. I need to confirm they actually represent my interests." "Smart. I'll have James Morgan call you directly within the hour." "And fourth, this is non-negotiable. Maya never finds out the details. She knows I work at a restaurant. She doesn't need to know her mother is informant in criminal investigation."
Something shifted in Michael Grant's expression, a softness that suggested understanding born from personal experience. "Agreed completely. Children deserve protection from adult problems." Ellie pulled her notebook from her purse and set it on the table between them. 6 months of careful observations, documented with dates and details. She debated bringing it to this meeting, half convinced she'd walk away without committing. But some part of her had known all along she would do this, would choose principle over pragmatism despite every lesson experience had taught. Michael Grant picked up the notebook with something like reverence. "This is remarkable work. Detailed, organized, exactly what prosecutors need to establish timeline and pattern." "I'm a forensic accountant. This is what we do." "Were a forensic accountant. Past tense isn't accurate anymore." The observation caught Ellie off guard. She'd spent 4 years defining herself by what she'd lost, rather than what she retained. "Eugene Foster destroyed my career." "He destroyed your employment at one firm. He didn't destroy your skill set or analytical abilities. Those are still intact, still valuable. After this investigation concludes, I'd like to discuss bringing you into Golden Harvest's corporate compliance department. Full-time position, benefits, salary commensurate with your experience level." The offer landed like a physical blow. Ellie's vision blurred for a moment. "You're offering me a job?" "I'm offering you the job you should have been doing all along, instead of serving tables. Someone with your talent identifying fraud in service industry is massive waste of human capital. But we can discuss specifics later. Right now, I need to understand the players involved." He opened the notebook to the first page where Ellie had drawn an organizational chart showing relationships between Derek, Vincent, and Rachel. "These are the 3 principals you're certain are involved." "Yes. I've documented 17 instances of them meeting privately in Derek's office, always on Sunday afternoons when the restaurant is slow. And I overheard one conversation where they explicitly discussed splitting proceeds." "Anyone else you suspect?" Ellie hesitated. Suspicion wasn't evidence, and she'd learned not to make accusations without proof. "The supplier, Supreme Meats. They're billing for premium products they're not delivering. Either they're complicit, or they're being defrauded too." "I'll have investigators look into Supreme Meats. What about other employees? Anyone who might have noticed irregularities?" "Marcus, one of the line cooks. He's been there 6 years, probably has seen more than he said, but I don't know if he'd testify." Michael Grant made notes on his tablet.
I'll need you to make a formal statement to FBI within the next week. Agent Lisa Harris is handling the case. She's experienced with white-collar crime and understands how to protect witnesses. The reality of what she'd committed to was settling in now, making Ellie's hands shake slightly. When will Derek find out? Not until arrest warrants are executed. FBI will coordinate with corporate to ensure he's removed from the crown jewel before he can retaliate or destroy evidence. And the other employees? We'll brief management team on need-to-know basis. Most staff won't learn details until after arrests. Ellie thought about showing up for her next shift with Derek gone, trying to maintain normalcy while knowing she'd been instrumental in his removal. The cognitive dissonance would be extraordinary. I should get back. Maya's daycare pickup is at 3. Of course. I'll have James Morgan call you within the hour. And Ms. Williams, thank you. What you're doing takes courage most people don't possess. The gratitude felt sincere, but Ellie couldn't quite accept it. Courage suggested choice made from strength. This felt more like choice made from exhaustion with status quo. She left the coffee shop and drove toward Maya's daycare with her mind spinning. The notebook was gone, surrendered to a billionaire who'd promised protection she wasn't certain would materialize. Every instinct screamed that she'd made catastrophic mistake, that trusting authority figures had already cost her once and was about to cost her again. But the alternative had been watching Derek continue stealing, continue abusing power, continue making everyone around him miserable while corporate remained oblivious. At least this way, she'd acted instead of simply endured. Her phone rang at 2:47, unknown number, but she answered anyway. Ms. Williams, this is James Morgan. I'm senior counsel at Golden Harvest, and I'll be representing your interests in the Derek Patterson matter. The voice was professionally warm, lawyer careful in phrasing. Michael Grant said you'd call. I wanted to introduce myself and confirm a few details. First, your whistleblower protection is now formally documented and filed with federal authorities. No one at Golden Harvest, including Michael Grant, can terminate your employment without triggering federal penalties. Even if the investigation falls apart? Even then, the protection is based on good faith reporting of suspected fraud, not on ultimate conviction. As long as you believed the information you provided was accurate, you're protected. The reassurance helped marginally. Ellie pulled into Maya's daycare parking lot and left the engine running. What happens next? FBI agent Lisa Harris will contact you within 72 hours to schedule formal interview. You'll provide testimony about what you observed and heard. After that, we wait while investigators build their case. Could take weeks or months, depending on complexity. And Derek just continues working until then? Unfortunately, yes. FBI wants to gather maximum evidence before showing their hand. Arresting Derek prematurely would alert other potential conspirators. The thought of serving alongside Derek while knowing he'd soon be arrested made Ellie's stomach turn. But she understood the logic. One more thing. James Morgan's voice shifted slightly. If anyone, Derek, other employees, random customers, asks you about the investigation or pressures you for information, document it immediately and contact me. Witness intimidation is serious crime. Understood. The call ended, and Ellie sat in her car watching children stream out of the daycare building. Maya appeared with her backpack and that stuffed rabbit, skipping toward the car with oblivious joy. 6 years old and completely insulated from the adult complications consuming her mother's attention. The drive home was full of Maya's chatter about crafts and playground politics. Ellie made appropriate responses while mentally preparing for tomorrow's shift at the Crown Jewel. Maintaining normalcy while sitting on information that would destroy Derek's life required acting skills she wasn't sure she possessed. That evening she made dinner and supervised homework, going through familiar routines with unusual care. As if being fully present now could somehow compensate for the disruption coming later. After Maya fell asleep, Ellie pulled out her laptop and searched for news about corporate fraud cases. The results were depressing. Most investigations took 18 to 36 months from initiation to trial, assuming cases went to trial at all. She could be living with this secret for years, working alongside Derek, pretending everything was normal, knowing she'd set wheels in motion that would eventually crush him. The psychological toll would be enormous. Her phone buzzed at 9:30. Text from Patricia. Patricia, you okay? You seemed off today. The message was innocent enough, but it spiked Ellie's anxiety. Was she already displaying tells that something had changed? She typed back carefully. Ellie, just tired. Maya's been restless at night. Patricia, let me know if you need coverage for any shifts. I've got your back. The kindness hurt in ways Ellie hadn't anticipated. Patricia offering support while unaware that Ellie had set in motion events that would upend everyone's stability. The guilt was irrational. She wasn't responsible for Derek's crimes, but it settled in her chest anyway. Wednesday's shift started at 11. Ellie arrived at 10:45 to find Derek already there, standing near the host stand reviewing reservation book. He looked up when she entered, and something flickered across his face. Suspicion? Paranoia? Or just his usual contempt for subordinates? Ellie, good, you're early. We're hosting a private party tonight, 25 people, prefix menu. You're taking lead server. The assignment was unusual. Derek typically gave high-profile events to servers with more seniority. Ellie felt warning bells sound. Is there a specific reason you want me on this one? Client requested our best wine pairings. Your upsell numbers make you the obvious choice. The explanation was plausible, but something felt wrong. Derek, watching her too closely, gauging her reaction with more attention than the conversation warranted. Who's the client? Sterling Enterprises. Corporate executives celebrating some acquisition. They're dropping $15,000 minimum, so don't screw it up. He turned away, dismissing her. Ellie headed to the break room with her pulse elevated. Sterling Enterprises meant nothing to her, but the timing, 2 days after meeting with Michael Grant, felt too coincidental. Was this legitimate assignment or test of some kind? She changed into her uniform and started prep work, trying to project normalcy despite the anxiety churning in her stomach. The dining room filled gradually through lunch service, Ellie moving between tables with practiced efficiency. Everything seemed routine until 2:30 when Derek called her into his office. The space was exactly as Ellie remembered from Sunday's conversation. Cluttered desk, filing cabinets she'd never been authorized to access. Derek sitting behind everything like judge at tribunal. Close the door. Ellie complied, her hands going cold. This was it. Somehow Derek had learned about the investigation, and now she'd face consequences before protection could materialize. I've been reviewing your personnel file. 3 years at the Crown Jewel. Generally solid performance, but I'm seeing pattern of insubordination.
The accusation was absurd, given that she'd never been formally disciplined, but Derek's expression suggested he believed his own narrative.
I've always followed company policy.
You quoted the handbook at me in front of customers. That's insubordination regardless of whether you were technically correct. So this was about Friday night after all. Derek nursing his wounded pride, looking for ways to reassert dominance. Ellie forced her expression neutral. I apologize if my response seemed disrespectful. I was trying to follow established protocols.
Your apology is noted, but I'm putting you on formal warning. Any future incidents of insubordination will result in immediate termination.
He slid a document across the desk. Official reprimand form, already filled out with description of Friday's incident, framed as her challenging his authority in unprofessional manner.
Space at the bottom for her signature. Ellie stared at the form, her mind racing. Signing would create paper trail Derek could use to justify firing her later. Refusing would trigger immediate confrontation that might accelerate whatever suspicions he harbored. This characterization of events isn't accurate. I cited company policy, which isn't insubordination. Your interpretation is noted. Sign the form. The command carried weight of ultimatum. Ellie picked up the pen, her hand steady despite the rage building in her chest. She signed her name and dated it, each stroke feeling like capitulation. Thank you. You can return to your shift. She left the office with the formal reprimand burning in her memory. Derek was building case for termination, establishing documentation that would justify firing her the moment he felt threatened, which meant the investigation timeline mattered more than she'd realized. If FBI didn't move quickly, Derek might eliminate her before whistleblower protection became relevant. Back on the floor, she found Patricia setting up for the evening's private party. The tables had been arranged in U-shape, place settings for 25 with wine glasses at each seat. Sterling Enterprises' celebration would require flawless execution, the kind of high-pressure service that left no room for distraction. "You okay?" Patricia's voice was quiet enough that other servers wouldn't overhear. "You look like you want to punch something." "Derek put me on formal warning for Friday night." "That's bullshit. You were following policy." "I know, but he's the manager and I'm the server, so policy doesn't matter as much as hierarchy." Patricia's expression darkened. "He's been worse than usual this week. Jumpy, paranoid, like he's waiting for something bad. I wonder if corporate's actually investigating him." The observation was too close to truth. Ellie felt her pulse spike. Why would corporate investigate Derek? The mandatory training on Sunday seemed random, and he got 2 phone calls yesterday that left him looking like he'd seen ghost. Something's happening, even if we don't know what. Ellie forced casual shrug. Maybe he's just stressed about numbers. Maybe. But Patricia's tone suggested she didn't believe it any more than Ellie did. They worked in silence for several minutes, arranging silverware and folding napkins. Then Patricia spoke again, voice carefully neutral. "If something does happen, if Derek gets in trouble or fired or whatever, you'd tell me, right? We've worked together 3 years. That counts for something." The question was pointed enough that Ellie felt the weight of it. Patricia was asking if she could be trusted, if their collegial relationship meant Ellie would be honest when things fell apart. "I'd tell you anything I was allowed to tell you." It was the most honest answer she could give. Patricia studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay, that's fair." The Sterling Enterprises party arrived at 6:30. 25 executives in expensive suits, carrying themselves with the casual confidence of people for whom $15,000 dinners were routine. Ellie slipped into server mode, taking drink orders and explaining the prefix menu with practiced charm. The wine pairings were excellent, selections that complemented each course perfectly, and the guests were appreciative. Service proceeded smoothly through appetizers and entrees. Ellie moved between the kitchen and dining room with efficiency born from thousands of similar shifts, anticipating needs before they were voiced. The executives were celebrating acquisition of some smaller company, toasting their success with champagne that cost more per bottle than Ellie made in a week. During dessert course, one of the executives, woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and sharper suit, gestured Ellie over. "The service tonight has been exceptional. What's your name?" "Ellie, ma'am." "Ellie, I'm Jennifer Hayes. I'm an executive at Golden Harvest Corporate." The introduction sent ice through Ellie's veins. Golden Harvest Corporate, at the Crown Jewel, tonight, 2 days after she turned over evidence to Michael Grant. This wasn't coincidence. This was test or surveillance or something else she hadn't anticipated. "It's nice to meet you, Miss Hayes. Michael Grant speaks highly of your professionalism. He mentioned you exemplify the service standards we're trying to maintain across all locations." The statement was coded, a message confirming that Jennifer Hayes knew exactly who Ellie was and what role she played in the investigation. Ellie maintained neutral expression despite her thundering pulse. "I appreciate that. I try to provide excellent service to all guests." "I'm sure you do. If you ever consider transitioning from floor service to corporate roles, please reach out. We're always looking for people who understand operations from ground level." Jennifer Hayes handed Ellie a business card. Senior Vice President, Operations. The title carried weight that suggested this woman had genuine authority. "Thank you, ma'am. I'll keep that in mind." The interaction lasted less than 2 minutes, but Ellie's hands shook as she returned to the kitchen.
Golden Harvest Corporate had sent senior executives to the Crown Jewel specifically to observe her, to send message that she was being watched and evaluated. Whether that was reassurance or warning remained unclear. The party concluded at 9:45 with generous tips and effusive compliments. Jennifer Hayes was the last to leave, pausing at the door to make eye contact with Ellie one final time.
Then she was gone, and Ellie was left wondering what the evening had actually accomplished. Derek emerged from his office as servers began cleanup. That went well. Sterling Enterprises' representative was complimentary about the service. His tone carried grudging acknowledgement, as close to praise as Derek ever managed. Ellie nodded but said nothing, unwilling to engage more than necessary. The drive home was consumed by analysis of Jennifer Hayes' appearance. Corporate sending executives meant the investigation was escalating faster than James Morgan had suggested, but it also meant Ellie was now visible to people with power, which brought its own dangers. At home, she checked on Maya and found her daughter sleeping peacefully, untroubled by the complications consuming adult world. Ellie stood watching her breathe for several minutes, memorizing the peace of her face. Her phone buzzed at 10:30. Michael Grant.
Grant. Jennifer Hayes reported you handled tonight's test perfectly. Well done.
So it had been test. Ellie's anger flared. Ellie, you could have warned me.
Grant. Real situations don't come with warnings. I needed to see how you handled pressure when surprised. You were professional, careful, exactly what we need.
Ellie, don't test me again without notice.
Grant. Fair. I'll brief you before any future corporate visits. How are you holding up?
The question felt genuine, concern rather than assessment. Ellie sat on her couch, staring at the phone.
Ellie, Derek put me on formal warning today. He's building case to fire me.
Grant, he's suspicious but doesn't have evidence. Formal warning is desperation move. FBI is accelerating timeline. Arrests should happen within 2 weeks. 2 weeks. 14 more days of pretending everything was normal while serving beside Derek. 14 days of maintaining lies and managing paranoia. It felt simultaneously too long and not long enough.
Ellie, I need this to be over.
I know. It will be. You're doing everything right. Trust the process. The conversation ended, and Ellie tried to sleep, but her mind wouldn't quiet. She kept replaying Jennifer Hayes' appearance, Derek's formal warning, the weight of secrets she couldn't share. The investigation was consuming her life in ways she hadn't anticipated, transforming every interaction into potential minefield. Thursday and Friday passed in similar tension. Derek watched her with suspicion that bordered on paranoia, assigning her extra side work and criticizing minor mistakes that would normally go unnoticed. Ellie endured it with gritted teeth, reminding herself that his behavior was desperation rather than power. On Saturday, FBI agent Lisa Harris called.
Ms. Williams, I'm ready to take your formal statement.
Can you come to the Chicago field office Monday afternoon? The appointment was scheduled for 2 p.m., which meant arranging childcare and taking time from her next day off. But this was the crucial step, providing testimony that would either make or break the case against Derek. Monday arrived with the first real snowfall of the season, Chicago transforming into gray slush and traffic nightmares. Ellie dropped Maya at her mother's house and drove downtown to the FBI building, an imposing structure that radiated institutional authority. Agent Lisa Harris met her in the lobby, woman in her 40s with no-nonsense demeanor and eyes that missed nothing. They moved to interview room, sparse space with recording equipment and the particular fluorescent lighting that made everyone look guilty. Thank you for coming. This interview will be recorded and may be used in federal prosecution. Do you understand? Yes. Excellent. Let's start with how you first became aware of fraud at the Crown Jewel. Ellie walked through 6 months of observations, describing each incident with the precision her forensic accounting training had instilled.
Lisa Harris took notes and asked clarifying questions, drilling down into specifics that would hold up under cross-examination. The interview lasted 2 hours. By the end, Ellie felt wrung out, every detail of Derek's crimes cataloged and documented. Lisa Harris clicked off the recorder. "You're an impressive witness. Defense attorneys will hate you." "Is that good?" "Very good. You're credible, detailed, and your background in forensic accounting gives you expertise that juries respect. Derek Patterson is going to prison largely because you noticed what everyone else missed." The assessment should have felt like victory, but Ellie only felt tired. "When will arrests happen?" "We're coordinating with Golden Harvest Corporate. Probably next Friday. We'll execute warrants simultaneously at Derek's home, Vincent's apartment, and Rachel's residence. By the time they realize what's happening, all 3 will be in custody." "And the crown jewel?" "New management will be installed immediately. Michael Grant is personally overseeing the transition to minimize disruption." Ellie left the FBI building and sat in her car processing everything. 1 more week. 7 days until Derek's world collapsed and hers shifted in ways she couldn't predict. The anticipation was almost worse than the waiting had been. Her phone rang. Patricia. "Ellie, are you sitting down?" The question spiked immediate panic. "What happened?" "Derek just got fired. Like, security escorted him out 20 minutes ago. Corporate sent new GM to take over. Everything's chaos here." Ellie's hands went numb. Friday. Agent Harris had said Friday. This was Monday. "Why did they fire him?" "No one knows." New GM, woman named Sarah Mitchell, just showed up with corporate security and told Derek to leave immediately. He tried to argue and they threatened to call police. Something had accelerated the timeline. Either FBI had moved early or Golden Harvest had initiated termination independent of criminal investigation. Ellie's carefully constructed understanding of events was disintegrating. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. She drove too fast through snow-slick streets, arriving at the Crown Jewel to find the parking lot full of employee cars. Inside, the entire staff had gathered in the dining room while a woman in her 50s addressed them. Sarah Mitchell, Ellie recognized her from Golden Harvest's corporate website, stood at the front projecting calm authority. "I understand this is disruptive, but I want to assure you that your jobs are secure. Derek Patterson's termination was a result of internal investigation that uncovered serious policy violations. None of you are implicated or under suspicion." Questions erupted from multiple servers simultaneously. Sarah raised her hand for silence. "I can't discuss specifics due to ongoing investigation. What I can tell you is that Golden Harvest takes fraud extremely seriously, and we will not tolerate managers who violate company values. Those of you who've been mistreated under Derek's management, that ends today." Her eyes found Ellie in the back of the room, holding contact for just a moment too long. Then she continued addressing the group, outlining changes that would take effect immediately. After the meeting ended, Patricia pulled Ellie aside. "Did you know this was coming?" The question was direct, impossible to deflect. Ellie met her eyes. "I knew Derek was under investigation. I couldn't tell you." "Because you reported him." It wasn't a question. Patricia had put pieces together, realized why Ellie had seemed off for weeks, why corporate had moved with unusual speed. Ellie waited for anger or accusation, but Patricia's expression showed only weary relief. "Thank God someone finally did. He's been stealing and terrorizing everyone for years. I just didn't think any of us had the guts to actually report it." The response surprised Ellie enough that she didn't immediately reply. Patricia continued. "I overheard him talking to Vincent 3 months ago about supplier kickbacks. I thought about reporting, but I was too scared. Figured corporate wouldn't believe me, or Derek would find out and fire me. So I stayed quiet and hated myself for it." She looked at Ellie with something like admiration. "You're braver than me." Thank you for doing what I couldn't. The gratitude felt undeserved, but Ellie accepted it anyway. They stood in silence for a moment, then Patricia hugged her, brief, fierce embrace that communicated more than words. The next week passed in strange transition. Sarah Mitchell ran the crown jewel with competence that made Derek's chaos visible by contrast. She solicited input from staff, addressed concerns promptly, and created atmosphere where people actually wanted to work rather than endured employment. Morale improved dramatically within days. On Friday, Agent Lisa Harris called with update. Arrests executed this morning. Derek Patterson, Vincent Ross, and Rachel Moore are all in federal custody. Arraignment is scheduled for Monday. Formal charges include wire fraud, conspiracy, and theft of over $200,000. The number was larger than Ellie had calculated. Her 15% would be $30,000 at minimum, potentially more if civil penalties increased the recovery. What happens now? They'll make bail. Fraud isn't violent crime. But their assets are frozen pending investigation, and Michael Grant is filing civil suit on behalf of Golden Harvest for treble damages, which could push total penalties over $500,000. Ellie felt something like vindication mixed with exhaustion. Derek's crimes had consequences, justice was being served, and she'd been instrumental in making it happen. But the cost lingered. Weeks of stress and secrets. The formal warning Derek had issued that remained in her personnel file. The psychological toll of maintaining lies while gathering evidence. That evening, Michael Grant called personally. I wanted to thank you again. Without your cooperation, Derek would still be stealing and abusing staff. You saved Golden Harvest significant money and protected innocent employees. I did what needed doing. You did more than that, which is why I'm formally offering you position in Corporate Compliance Department. Forensic investigator, salary $95,000 annually, full benefits, schedule flexibility for Maya's medical needs. The offer was exactly what he'd suggested at the coffee shop, but hearing it formalized made it real. Ellie could leave service work, return to career she'd trained for, provide stability she'd been chasing for 4 years. I accept. Excellent. HR will reach out Monday with onboarding details. Welcome to Golden Harvest Corporate, Ms. Williams. After the call ended, Ellie sat on her couch, staring at nothing. Her life had transformed in 3 weeks from desperate survival to genuine opportunity, all because she'd noticed what others missed and had the courage to speak when silence would have been easier. Maya emerged from the bedroom asking for water. Ellie poured it and watched her daughter drink, memorizing this moment of peace before everything changed again. Mommy, why are you smiling? Because things are getting better, baby. Finally getting better. And for the first time in years, Ellie believed it.